I have the pleasure of having Eli Nash in Search of More, from the Search of More podcast. Me and Eli met, I don't know, 7 years ago in an airport.
In an airport.
I had the pleasure of being a guest on his podcast. Eli has made a significant. He's helped many people with porn addictions, and his work is really great. His podcast is great. Many about healing, psychedelics, pretty much about everything. So today it's my turn to interview you on definitely things that I'm curious about. Especially, I see you're definitely on this healing journey, and definitely what you went through and how you overcame it. TED Talk, that was very courageous.
Thank you.
We share also Gay Ramata. I love him.
Right.
I love his stuff. Pretty much we want to bring more people to healing and more people to right conscious. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
So I see you're talking a lot about. Let's talk about the elephant, psychedelics. Never in a million years would I even think I would even recommend people to do this. But today, there's people that are genuinely stuck, and we thank God we have a successful podcast. But I even hear Daniel Katz speak about it. But there's people that are genuinely stuck, that they need something like a little help from above.
Yeah.
How'd you get into this? Tell me how'd you get into psychedelics and what did it do for you, etc.
Right. So you mentioned Gabor Mate. So first, a little background. I didn't explore with drugs before. It wasn't a drive for me as a teenager or a young adult. It wasn't not psychedelics, not regular drugs. It wasn't an area I touched. I had weed maybe 2 or 3 times in my life.
Thank God.
Correct. Yeah, it wasn't an area. And I did have an addiction, right? I had a sex addiction.
Sure,
I was addicted to prostitutes, strip clubs, massage parlors, porn, all of that stuff. So I had vices. It's just drugs weren't it. The reason I bring that up is because I wasn't exploring it from that angle. What happened was I was in recovery for many years. One of the people I followed closely was Gabor Mate. And I'd heard people mention things about different medicines, different plant medicines or psychedelics. There are many different names for these things, each one with its own meaning.
I see that, yeah.
But, yeah. Each one has a little bit of, like the way someone, like a true ayahuasquero won't call it psychedelics. Right. Not psychedelics.
Correct.
Right. They won't use that term.
Mushrooms, there's all kinds of different ones.
But not only those are different medicines, but also the name we use.
Okay.
Some plant medicines. In the Amazon, right, which ayahuasca is probably the one I've worked closest with and have had the most healing with, they call it a medicine, right, not a psychedelic. In any case, I'd heard other people talk about it, but of course I was skeptical, right? How is this not drugs? Then I heard Gabor Mate talk about it, which he is one of the people I followed most closely in my own recovery from addiction. Even though I was a 12-step person, and I don't really consider him a 12-step person,
right?
But his message, his compassionate inquiry, and a lot of his books, in the realm of hungry ghosts and his talks, it was something I followed. And in 2019, I heard him on a podcast with Tim Ferriss, and I believe the words he used were that ayahuasca is the single most powerful tool for healing addiction that he's seen.
Wow.
And I was just too curious not to see what he was talking about. I trusted him.
Right.
Obviously, it's like, where do you get it? Just walk to the grocery store.
How'd you come to get it, and what was your experience like?
So prior to that, ayahuasca is a little bit more difficult experience to have because it's very closely connected to the shaman and the one who's running the room. There's a ceremonial aspect to it, whereas mushrooms can be taken. You can take it in a dark room by yourself and maybe have someone sitting outside to keep you safe. But there isn't that the shaman who's leading the ceremony, who's in there with you in the experience, guiding you. It's really hard to use words to explain this, but for someone who's experienced both, they know exactly what I'm talking about.
Got it.
So my first experience was not actually with ayahuasca. What happened is I'd heard from Gabor Mate, and then I'd made the decision that I want to do it. Making the decision that I want to do it is not the same as doing it. Obviously, there's a lot of legal issues. There's a lot of, what am I going to do? Just show up in Peru and on the side of the road?
Right. Yeah, it's a crazy. I'm just so curious how people's experience with this. Yeah.
Right. So the first thing, obviously, was, okay, I'm going to bring this up with my wife. What is she going to think about it? And without me even bringing it up, she told me of someone she knew, a couple which were struggling, which did an MDMA journey together. And, each one of these substances in the science will explain, different benefits that they have. MDMA is often used in a therapeutic setting It also has obviously a party and drug quality to it. This is not
Clearly.
a certification or a stamp of approval for all use of MDMA. And I know you run a drug clinic as well.
Absolutely,
and a detox,
yeah.
right?
That's why. Again, from my angle is obviously, but there's times that you have to open people up, and if whatever is needed is needed.
Correct. The way I see that is like, let's say sex. Sex is a good example, maybe a little bit coarse, but it's the way my mind thinks. Having sex with a prostitute and having sex with one's wife is the exact same thing, but it couldn't be more different.
Correct.
One is to escape and one is to connect.
Sure.
So in much the same way, we can use a knife for surgery to heal. We can use a knife to
The intention
cut and
behind
destroy.
it.
100%.
Right.
So my wife had told me about a couple she knew which was struggling on the brink of divorce and did a guided MDMA journey with someone and had profound healing. And they felt like they had a second chance at their marriage. Turns out it didn't work. Fast, like where we are today, it has not worked for them. But in the moment, they felt some sort of some hope. So that was kind of the first, after I hear this podcast, and I already have my wife's blessing. She already had a positive experience. And then my wife and I were on a trip in France, actually the same trip. I have to think of it, the same trip,
so
that I
funny.
saw you. So it was actually,
I was going to Oman, you were going to France. Wow.
yeah, it was actually 2019. So it was like about 4 years ago.
That's right. Wow.
Yes, I was going to France. We just had our second child, and we had a baby nurse that we hired for a few months, and she was leaving. So we said, you know what, just before the 3 months end, let's take a trip, my wife and I. And we went there, and you're always kind of a little bit more curious when you're traveling. And we ran into a couple who was staying at a friend's house, whatever, the details aren't so important. We're sitting, and the guy's talking about a sex addiction that he's had and how he's used psychedelics to help heal him. So that was, okay, this is kind of my second sign. And then I said, okay, I'm going to do something. I just didn't know where. And then
So you got enough signs that
Those are two.
This is where you go.
Then a week or two later, when I met you was before Rosh Hashanah, right before Rosh
It was
Hashanah.
literally, I was going to Oman on that plane in Miami International, right?
Okay, so it's crazy the timing. So while I'm on the trip there, I got back to Miami before Rosh Hashanah. While I'm on the trip there, I meet this couple who tells me they had just got married, they were on their honeymoon. We had a lunch with them, and he's telling me about psychedelics and sex addiction, how it's helped heal him in a lot of ways. We get back to Miami, I get a call from someone who I barely knew. And she tells me, I don't know why I'm telling you this. I don't share a lot of my life, like this aspect of my life, people. I understood later that it came up for her in a psychedelic experience to introduce me to it. And she said, I just want to let you know about this facilitator who I know and trust. And that's it. It's booked in a couple of weeks.
But what got you? You felt you were stuck in a way?
What was going on in my life? I had a lot of anxiety still.
Okay.
Despite the fact that I was sober, I still...
And even though you spoke about porn,
I spoke about everything, yeah. I still had a lot of anxiety. It wasn't as intense as it once was.
Because you figured that would have been, hey, I got purpose out of this. I'm on TED Talks. I'm helping tons of people. You figured that would have been the magic button, that would have done it. It gave you like that purpose.
I was sober at that time, but there was still anxiety deep inside me. Yeah.
Wow.
I was manifesting a lot at work, a lot with my kids. It was very difficult for me to be present and relaxed in a lot of settings. And I also was still working hard at the addiction. It wasn't like the way I am today is not the same.
Were you learning? Were you learning Chassidus? Were you learning anything, or were you just you spoke about it and you?
At that time, I wasn't talking so much about it. I wasn't learning. No.
Okay, so you were learning.
I wasn't learning. No, that actually I started learning afterwards. It was
Got
during an experience I had was the realization that I was, because I had so much resentment and anger towards people in my upbringing, I was throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Understood.
And in experience, I felt like, maybe I should reconnect with the Rebbe. I had a troubled relationship with the Rebbe a little bit because this was his community, and I saw a lot of darkness in the community. And then everyone says whatever, he says a lot of sayings, a lot of books, a lot of letters. Anything you want to support, you'll find a letter for him. The Rebbe said this in 1972. And if you really know his stuff, you'll find somewhere he said the opposite. It could have been a personal instruction. It could have been the context is missing, whatever. Everyone is able to support whatever they want.
You hear what you want to hear, and you see
100%.
what you want to see. That's the bottom line.
And on a journey, there was realization that, hey, this guy's definitely something. Even on a practical level, without understanding anything spiritually.
No
what
question.
he created from a business perspective, from an organization perspective, is unbelievable.
There's no question.
So I said, let me connect him. How would I connect him? Because I'm not going to read about him. I'm going to listen to people's Rebbe stories. I have no interest in Rebbe stories. Let me see what he says himself, his own his own books, and I started learning that, and that's reconnected me to Judaism a lot.
You know, it's the story with me, and I was always connected to Chabad earlier, even though I was, you know, off my own, Derek. But the Rebbe literally called play by play when my mother, she wrote to him when I was 8 years old, should we leave to America? And back then, my parents were getting divorced, and the Rebbe told her, get out of there fast. and Rabbi Groner, they play by play, they called that whole move for me coming to America due to the Lubavitcher Rebbe.
Oh, well. Cool.
And play by play. I mean, it was play by play. I witnessed it as when I found the stories, I found the letters.
Nice.
And it was, once you hear that, I mean, there's nothing to. But I never really connected as much as Chabad as Breslov. Breslov really got me to where I am. Obviously, we had that story.
Yeah, there are many different paths.
I mean, I love Chabad. I'm a big supporter. But Breslov for me speaks a little bit more of the emotional, the way I connect. Obviously. So speaking about, you know, this is something a message that I spread a lot, that, you know, there's a difference between what I see, the difference between Hasidus and our teachings versus just psychology. And I've read Gabriel Matz's books and all that. It all helps you get really to, it helps you, it gets you to maybe to change your consciousness, but not grow in consciousness. That I've seen. Like what I've seen with teachings, with Chabad teachings and Breslov Hasidus, it really gets you to a much higher consciousness versus just feeling better and giving a meaning.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
It's hard for me to
altering consciousness versus expanding consciousness.
Right. It's hard for me to like give an opinion on it without medicines. Meaning
Got it.
my view of it was so tainted because I was introduced to it in a very unhealthy way, or it felt to me very unhealthy. So
Understood.
I had so much, like I said, resentment. I couldn't read a Rebbe's Sikha or a teaching of him without it bringing up emotions.
Correct.
You know, I'll tell you an experience I had on ayahuasca, where it was very surprising to me, but it was actually what happened. It said, "Do you want to understand your resentment for your father?"
Wow.
And I said, "Okay," you know, and it feels like a communication. I said, "Yeah," and I was pulled into a vision of me yelling at him and saying, "You had to mess with Shabbos? Of all things, you had to mess with Shabbos?"
Wow.
And I didn't expect that. It was very, very unexpected. Like that would be the thing. But there was an understanding then. Something that I picked up on as a child was that Shabbos was more stressful, right? You had the 18 minutes. Even in Crown Heights, there's an alarm that goes off.
Oh, you grew up in Crown Heights?
I grew up in Crown Heights,
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
There was an alarm that went off. You know, they would say like the 18 minutes. And it was, to me, it was oppressive. It was just not a nice song. They should have played like a nice, beautiful song. It sounded like a bomb siren that was going off like Shabbos is coming. And there was all this association with it. And I attributed that, I guess, some of that to my father and the way he wanted Shabbos to be practiced, that there was an oppressive quality to it. And as a result, Shabbos, I don't think without that experience,
wow,
I could have reconnected to Shabbos. Within a couple months of that experience, I said, you know, I'm going to put my phone away on Shabbos. And since then, it's been step by step, adding more and more.
It's so amazing. Until I saw a different definition also, because you start, you know, there's 39 laws for Shabbat, and every law has a subcategory. And you could be, I mean, almost you have to be like on, God forbid, you know, you touch the wrong thing, you're you know, muksa, etc. It gets a little heavy for the average person.
Yeah.
Until I really understood the concept that when we say kiddush, we're thanking God for getting us out of slavery. The fact that I need to touch anything, or the fact that I need anything else just not to be present on Shabbat, that itself is a slavery. So now it made more sense why you have to. Basically, the whole push is to get you into presence and really, really receive, instead of thinking, you know, getting in the way of your own blessing. It's really a letting go technique, Shabbat. It's like letting go and letting God just get to a higher consciousness that day, instead of being a slave to our phones, being a slave to everything.
Right. I came across a book by Ari Kaplan on Shabbos, and he described it, which
he's amazing. Kaplan.
Which resonated with me is there's a one day a week where we're not trying to manipulate creation. Everything is perfect just as it is. Anything that manipulates.
I feel like we need more of the Aryeh Kaplans. Like Aryeh Kaplan, you know, he wrote a lot of Reb Nachman's teachings at the end. He definitely had a different way of explaining things. I think like we need that for the younger generation.
In some ways, I think it's like psychedelics gives a certain consciousness of that. doesn't feel, it takes out any of the oppressive qualities for me of Judaism, because you get an experience, a taste of it on a much like a much more real level.
It's so funny because tonight is going to be Shabbat, and this is pretty much. It feels like this experience, like the first night of Passover, we got that high, and then now we have to take 49 days in order to get to the same high we got on the first night, which is an earned high, not just a gift. So it's funny how this is like God gives us like that boost. He gives you like a boost of where you could be, and then he takes it away because he wants you yearning.
Right.
Sometimes did psychedelics invoke yearning for you? Did it get you into a hungrier mode? Wow, you know what? I'm so interested for this, because obviously after that gift you get, now you have to really put it into action. Did it make you hungrier in life? Did it make you seek more wisdom?
It's definitely changed my path in a lot of ways.
So then it did good for you.
It did good, but it's not without work. And when I shared that experience of reconnecting with the Rebbe, the way I took it then was every single day I'm going to learn one page, and one page with the Rebbe's teachings. And sometimes once you start a page, you're going to put it down. It's interesting, right? So you keep going. And for several weeks, I had that motivation without doing anything. Now it's not the same. I don't pick it up every single day.
Got it.
If I do a couple times a week, it's good. So yes, it does take. There was that initial inspiration, which I didn't have to work. It was my mind is reverberating with this. My whole body is reverberating with this message. And now it takes an actual practice, and the enjoyment doesn't come until I'm a couple pages in.
Right, but it's not an answer to go, is it worth doing psychedelics again? No, you already got the clarity.
It depends when I don't do it. Right, I find that certain people, there are risks. I mean, if you want to talk about that, I do find that certain people get lost there.
Okay.
Get lost there, go there a little
keep
bit
on
too
going
often.
back.
Yeah, keep on going
back.
You can unpack an experience for a very, very, very long time.
Right.
I had an experience the very first time I took psilocybin, which was, let's say, 3.5 years ago, that I only unpacked this week.
Wow.
Fully. I don't even say fully, that I've started to understand some of it related to my sexual abuse, what was the vulnerability the guy was taking advantage of, how I cannot bring that to my family. It was introduced to me then, but it wasn't until much later. I mean, now.
I heard a great concept, I believe by Joe Dispenza, that he basically explains that whenever we go through an experience, there's an emotion afterwards, and we'll keep on replaying that emotion over and over and over again until we turn it into wisdom. Wisdom is the memory without the emotion.
So the knowledge,
the wisdom. For example, if right now you are clearly helping tons of people, I've gone through my own. My son passed away 2 years ago. I've gone through it all. But I no longer replay those things anymore in my life, because I elevated it to wisdom. I elevated those experiences, so that they no longer bother me. They're part of my life. They're my
right.
So I would figure, for example, you went through this. Now you've helped so many people. Why do you have to keep on going back there? You feel like to heal, like you feel like there's an unpart of
no,
area.
There isn't necessarily. There isn't. First of all, I know that I have a certain this like responsibility, kind of, to open doors and see what's there, and so there's more of like an exploratory part. Does different medicines do different things?
Okay.
Right, and could we, like recently I experienced a sweat lodge ceremony. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. There's no medicine involved with that. But it is a ceremonial. I did it with the Lakota tradition, which Lakota tribe, which Gabor Mate talks about in his book. And you sit in basically a hot room for like 2.5, 3 hours.
Right.
And it brings you to a level of bittul
which ultimately we're getting to bittul. At the end of the day, we're all getting to. The goal here is to basically block out the ego that's stopping us from becoming our best self.
Right. And some of that was for me to understand. It was something I was working on, but some of that was for me to understand, like, what does this offer that other things don't? Because I do talk about healing and growth. I am in search of more. And then as I'll have a few experiences and then understand what it offers, then you start understanding, okay, this person, this is better for. This person, that's better for.
Did you ever connect emotionally to prayer? Did you ever try like
it's one of
do it, his bun do? Did you ever try that?
It's one of the messages I get repeatedly, like literally.
Because I feel like you could get so much of this through really
afterwards.
going into bittul.
Afterwards.
Right.
So it depends. In my case, I don't think I could have. I don't think I could have. And the
Right.
problem was that I was introduced to all of these concepts. I think it's very dangerous to introduce God to kids because you can screw it up really badly.
If the wrong way, if right, if you're
Exactly.
especially if your perspective is off, right?
Yeah, I think in terms of recovery, like if when I sponsored people, like give me someone who didn't, because I have to introduce spirituality and godliness and higher power to this person who's struggling with addiction. Give me someone who didn't grow up with any religion.
Yeah, that's.
I have a much
feel
easier
that-
time.
I feel 100%. I feel that it's because they're especially the religious. It's funny how in my recovery centers you could see different sectors of Jews. They come in with different needs. Like the Hasidic community in general, you'll see them. They lost their self in the community, and they got you're not this enough. You're not religious enough, and that's such a horrific experience.
Then they
that
heard the word
turned-
God.
Correct. They turned to heroin. So they turned to heroin to get that love that they never got.
Right.
So you could see they're on heroin. You see the Syrians or the high, they're connected to cocaine. They need that confidence. They need that,
Oh,
feel
interesting.
like I'm just as rich as
Oh,
everybody.
you see it?
There's no, I see it I saw it
Really?
personally. I see the different sectors.
And is Chabad connected to sex addiction?
I see that, I see in general that is an issue that's untouched, that a lot of people don't talk about. I don't feel that Chabad talks enough about this area where Reb Nachman is all over the place on right away. Hey, we all have this issue. Reb Nachman says, hey, we all have this issue, and we're all prone to this, and this is what's causing us to be depressed, and this is where we're going to go when we're depressed.
Right.
Let me tell you how to help you. Where Chabad, maybe again, I don't know, I'm not.
Chabad traditionally was staying away from it, I think.
But Breslov goes heavy duty.
Really?
He goes. There's nobody I think that went into sadness and depression as much as Reb Nachman.
Well, the Tanya talks a lot about.
But not
about
Reb
that.
Nachman. You're talking about almost every chapter. He's
Right.
talking about the fight
Constantly.
for joy. It's almost like when you're feeling joy, it's because you put work in. You're almost basically drawn to gravity of sadness. That's what he says.
Right.
So when
That
you
it
feel
might be
sad, you're not knocking yourself over your head, but you're doing things to get you out of it.
But he also talks about the sexual struggle as well.
He says everybody has it, and unless you pray to get out of it, you'll have it.
Yeah, this is
Like
my,
it's inside of you,
right.
basically.
This is my main message, and what I felt like I was missing growing
Correct.
up is I thought I was alone in the struggle,
No, right. That's
and then
what
only to
enough.
find out that everyone has it.
Everybody has it, and it even came to a point where he said back then, 75%. Why do you think he came out with the remedy for this issue? Because he saw that people were just so depressed over it, and he came out with the Tikkun HaKlali to help people that they did have these accidents, and he gave them a tremendous amount of hope for it. That's his hope. 250 years ago, he knew what the problem was.
Right.
So, and he says 3/4 of the world have it. So you're talking about 70 to 80% of the people have this.
Right. Now it's even more.
Now it's forget that's
Yeah.
250 years ago.
Right.
Now 99,
Right.
95.
Before Instagram.
So it's pretty much you have to ask yourself, what are you doing for this situation? What are you doing? What are you doing practically to get you out of this?
Have you seen that? Have you seen more Chabad people who deal with sex addiction?
In general, I see it's not touched. It's not emphasized.
Okay.
It's not spoken about.
I'm a
enough.
Chabad person, so
Right. It's
trying to do
not
something
spoken.
about
It's
it.
not spoken about as much. Where Reb Nachman, this is always
Right.
all we speak about is, hey, this is our struggle. This is what we got to do.
Understood.
And I wanted to be honest with you. If every phone call that I get with people struggling, this is 90% of the issues, 95% of the issues
porn.
that people don't know.
Sexuality. Yeah.
Porn, sexuality, yeah.
Right.
Because it's
Are you getting calls mostly from men who are looking to stop it, or women who are struggling with the fact that men are doing it?
both? 'Cause with singles, it's the guys not being able to find their soulmate, finding all kinds of difficulties, sadness, and depression. And again, I went through that struggle. So that's their number one struggle for sure. I mean, just think about it. Anytime you get something without working, it's going to lead you to shame. So who's
do you
going to walk around with a guy, with full of shame?
So do you see psychedelics as something that's
No.
achieved without work?
I not if the intention is to get a person a boost. Like I recommended it. I had a friend of mine who just literally did it yesterday, and he was stuck.
Right.
I'm trying to tell him this. These are people that have gone through therapy, that have tried, and I was originally against it, but I'm against maybe going 10 times. Okay, this is what you got the opening. Now you got to put the work in.
Right. Okay, so let me understand that, because maybe that can be helpful. when you were more against it, what was your position?
I didn't. Pretty much ignorance. Not that I didn't
Right.
know enough about it, but I know the concept in Kabbalistic that if it's something, for example, the Rebbe speaks about marijuana, and he says if the awakening, and he advised people not to smoke it. I'm very against marijuana,
Right.
because again, you're alternating consciousness instead of expanding consciousness. So anytime that you are taking something and the awakening is coming from outside of you, it's never going to last. But if the awakening happens from inside of you, it will last. That's exactly what the Rebbe said, by the way, in his letter. That if the awakening, and actually it's a gem video, if the awakening comes from inside of you, then it's going to last. If it's awakening from outside of you, not necessarily it'll last. So, for example, this psychedelics gets you to a new
Weed,
attitude.
I think, is very difficult. It's very different, you know.
I've seen the more bad than good.
Yeah, same. I don't know. I don't know of it in a therapeutic use. I'll tell you why. I mean, I've heard some things about people using it in a therapeutic way, but in general, most of what
I've
we
seen.
see.
How about this? There's facilities that are licensed in Florida that are weed assisted therapy, and that nobody's getting healing.
Right.
It's how you're getting a license because it's harm reduction. It's just people are setting the bar really low.
I tried one experience of that, just curiosity, even though I said early on I didn't, but I tried one in a more therapeutic capacity, doing it with the meditation and everything else, and I found it very chaotic.
Yeah.
I wasn't able to piece thoughts together. I wasn't clear. Very different than other experiences, which felt like it was bringing me more present. This
Right.
was bringing me more
Scattered.
chaos and scattered. Yeah.
Yeah, which
So-
is ultimately, at the end of the day, we just want to get to bittul. Even Reb Nachman says, for example, that if you drink a little bit, just to give you shuvadat, it's okay. And he says the difference between drinking good, it means alcohol itself cannot be all bad. That means if you drink a little bit, the people would say l'chaim, it expands the mind and it leads you to love. But if the alcohol is leading you to hate people, then you're doing it the wrong way.
Understand.
So it's not that there's obviously that we're all on an edge. We all need a little bit of. We need a break. We need a l'chaim sometimes. But if it's used to open up your mind to get you to more clarity, yes. But if it's used to avoid pain, that's the problem.
Right. I do have maybe a special place in my heart, so to speak, for ayahuasca. And I think one of the reasons why, besides for it's where the most profound healing has come, and it could be because of my problem, like Gabor Mate said.
And again,
This
I
is-
never had sexual.
yeah.
I've never been sexually abused or had this issue. So
Also
I
addiction.
can't even judge.
Just addiction.
Yeah,
Like there are studies. I'll give you an example.
gambling, but I can't judge somebody who's gone through that horrific experience. I mean, so maybe
Right.
they are so stuck.
You know what's interesting? That almost never came up for me. I'd healed most of the sexual abuse between
Right.
EMDR and confronting my abuser, and by the time I got there, it wasn't like it never came up as an experience, as something that's an unresolved trauma. The most that's come up is piecing together, which I mentioned earlier in this conversation, about what my vulnerability was as a child, and
I see.
what was missing in my home, and because I was raised in my home, what I have to make sure is in my home, so that
Got
I
it.
don't more of a knowledge and awareness, but not like not the trauma being healed. That felt like that was already done. But in terms of ayahuasca, there's no known, as far as I know, there's no recreational counterpart for that medicine. Whereas a lot of other stuff, MDMA there is, psilocybin there is. A lot of people
Got
say, I'll
it.
go to movies and take some mushrooms and I'll
Got
better
it.
experience. Ayahuasca, there's a certain sacredness that everyone I know approaches it with, and everything I've ever heard, I've never heard of
Right.
someone saying, let me go to a festival and take some ayahuasca.
Right.
Like it would be the
Right.
craziest thing. It's so intense, and there's no way to control it. Whereas other ones, it feels like you can direct it a little bit. This one, you're thrown into its
Right.
experience, and very, very profound healing I've seen with it. In terms of number of experiences, depends where someone is at. I know a guy who's struggling a lot with opioid addiction, and he has a couple experiences. It's a little better. Another couple experiences, a little better. But then he falls back. And
Right.
Recently he did something interesting where he went to a 60 or 90-day rehab. And as part of that, almost prepared himself and cleaned himself for ayahuasca. That's the last I've heard from him. So after being completely in that space, then went and did ayahuasca. So he's not coming,
But I
straight.
think
And we'll see if it sticks. But if someone needs more, they need more. You know, how many meetings does someone need? How many therapy sessions does someone need?
That's the whole thing.
It's hard to say.
I mean, ultimately, our sages tell us that our job in life is not to understand evil; it's to overcome it. So, just in that context, I mean, I'm not supposed to understand. I mean, that's what bittul is. I don't have to understand everything that happened. Sometimes I just have to overcome it,
Right.
and I think that's the tikkun. The tikkun is, I mean, today is malchut sheba malchut, which is, you know, ultimately the building that responsibility and giving the glory to God. But that's always in my life. I don't have to always understand everything.
And you're
I have to
connecting that to
overcome
what?
it. In general, in life, for example, you know, you go through an abuse, you go through situations. Like sometimes you go, hey, why did this happen? How could I have gone
Oh, it's
through
a
this?
terrible question to ask.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have to overcome it. Like, you know, that's really my goal in life. What is my goal in life is really to overcome these things. Because otherwise I'm still controlled by that event
Right.
in my life.
Yeah, I'd probably use the language get through it versus overcome, but
Right.
yeah.
But you overcome it by becoming much bigger.
Yeah, I think there's a destination that's possible to arrive to, which is that if I was given authority over my own story, I would add that chapter in it. And I think I've seen people get to that destination, and I've got there myself with sexual abuse. Ironically, there are stuff that happened 6 months ago that are much smaller that I'm
Correct.
struggling with.
Correct.
Right, those things are bugging me. I wouldn't add it to my story,
Right.
so it means more work needs to be done.
So as
in
far
that
as
area.
prayer, you haven't really tried something like really hardcore self-talk.
I don't know hardcore self, but it's definitely been a repeated message for me. Like there's two, like within Judaism, right? And I found this, it's for different people.
Yeah.
Right? Different people need different things more intensely. But on plant medicine experiences, the two like Jewish things that have come up the most are Shabbos
Wow.
and prayer, like repeatedly.
Incredible.
And it's the importance of daily prayer. So, and it showed me to do it, you know, not just Chabad style. I mean, like Chabad style, I don't mean Chabad people, like Chabad outreach style, you know, which I was doing for a long time. Just put on tefillin quickly, say the prayer, and put it down. I said, no, take a talis, make a space, set aside time, do this. And it actually connected, in my case, to, I've been dealing with the last 6 months with like a mild physical illness, like mono, that keeps coming back up, and it connected it for me.
Wow.
I said, do daily prayer, and then the stuff that's affecting you, that's weighing you down, you'll have a daily opportunity to clean you out.
It's funny because Rabbi Nachman says that prayer changes your energy, renews your energy. And the fact is, really, if we think about why we're holding things in the first place, it's because if we prayed for it, we just let it go. We would elevate it to God. Like the weight of life, when we hold on to things in life, when we hold on to fights, this weighs us down.
Right.
Through prayer, you get a new consciousness, and specifically his bodhidut, talking to God. I mean, that's the number one thing that changed my life.
I'll tell you something interesting. Like
But without tikkun brit, you can't get the prayer. You understand?
Say
So
more.
first you need to fix the brit part to get first you need to fix the sexuality part, which Kabbalistically is the yesod, to get to prayer.
Right, meaning if that's in the way,
You won't get the prayer because
you
you'll
won't
have
even access it.
Yeah, because you'll have too much shame. The whole purpose is if I have too much shame, I'm never going to even approach God.
So why even pray?
You pray at a broken heart.
So you pray about that.
pray to help not to get that shame anymore, to be able to earn the light. And I find that different people have. For example, I'm a very emotional person, so for me, prayer came easier. Are you like an earth sign?
Taurus.
Yeah, you're like deep earth. So it's hard for earth signs. So hard, they're much harder to open up emotionally.
Right. To prayer did not come naturally to me.
No, because you're a very logical person. Give me the solution. Let me fix it.
Yeah, I'll tell you. So I'll tell you something.
Not that you understand the
I
issue.
understand. No, it's definitely not something that was the first thing that
It's
to go for me.
Taurus to pray. They're like they're earth. They're stuck. Do you understand? It's like Scorpios don't even think like that. We're very emotional and we're connected to intensity and emotions, etc. So it's
much easier to do that.
Much easier to express in prayer because of your emotional. You have that emotional. You're much more emotional.
Yeah, it's definitely not my natural place to go to prayer, which is why it may be so important for me.
That could be the tikkun.
Right, exactly. So I'll share something with you.
Sure.
So this last summer, I had something with my children where they ended up in a locked room, young children, 3 and 2, and like the bathtub overflowed. So I kind of felt like, wow, there's a close call. I should do something for them. Saying, what should I do? Like I felt like I had to do something, like a giving of thanks. I made a donation to an organization, but it still didn't feel right. It felt undone. It felt incomplete.
Right.
And when I meditated on it, the thought that came up was, I should pray daily.
Wow.
And it didn't feel right. It didn't feel enough. Like, what do you mean? That's my thank you. It's so, like, I would give a gift to someone else. I'd give a gift to God. Like, let me give a donation somewhere. That was my instinct. Right. So I heard it, but I didn't do anything with it. And then on an ayahuasca experience, it explained, like, no, that's the thing to do. Like, that is exactly the thing. The thing for them, like, you want to do thank you, because that personal relationship that's developed through prayer with an individual and God, with myself and God, that's the gift. That's the gift for you, for God, for the world. That's it. It doesn't have to be. So for me, like you're saying, like that logically was, okay, I want to say thank you. I'm going to give something to someone else. That was the thought. Right. And even though it came up for me in meditation, I was able to push it away. But during an ayahuasca ceremony, you don't get to push away.
But the whole point of all of this is getting into bittul.
100%.
I mean, that's, if you would have told me, okay, what's the mission statement we got to do to get out of this issue and turn it into growth, getting into bittul, getting 100%. Into surrender.
100%.
And prayer is surrender.
Yeah, or getting into the breath, right? Just
connecting.
But
with same,
that.
all that,
yeah,
all 100%. all that. You know, I spoke about today my podcast that came home from the Heat game super late. You know, woke up late, so I said, you know what? Let me go back to the fields. I specifically remember when I started doing his bodhidut. I read Ram Nachman's teachings for 10 years. I did not do his bodhidut because it was just
right.
I was more into the head, and then got a divorce. My son had cancer. It was just, life completely just went crazy. It got so bad that it forced me into prayer. I always love that line that prayer doesn't get you out of trouble. Trouble gets you into prayer.
Right. Yeah, I've seen you say that too.
And that got me, and I went to go visit those fields yesterday.
When you say fields?
I specifically went, before I had my podcast, I had much more time. Now I give but right after prayer, I would pray sunrise, and I would go strictly I would go to these fields in Aventura.
Okay.
There's a field, there's a park, because Reb Nachman advised to go to the fields. Because
you
get nature. You get energy from the nature. The reason why is because when you're connected to nature, people's thoughts are not in the way. The more I'm connected to nature, the less the place is secluded. For example, there's an energy in a person's house. You walk into an energy, there's a great energy in the house. Oh, terrible energy. Our thoughts create energy.
Right.
So the places that are secluded don't have that negative energy. So it's easier for us to open up. For example, I'll go and pray at the same location all the time because I built that positive energy there.
Understood.
Right? So, and I went back to the battlefield. I remember now I do the same Hizbodut to my backyard in the water. But I said, this is my battlefield. And it took me 6 months to get answered in Hizbodut. But it took me 6 months. Imagine doing something for 6 months, not getting answered, and then after that, my whole life changed completely.
And the answer was?
The answer was everything got resolved. My mind opened.
Gotcha.
It was an
before
all of these things were out. Back then, no question, I would have done. I would have done something because I was so stuck. But there was nothing else. But what are you going to do? There's no other options.
Yeah.
You know, now you have more other options. I think to help people get that opening.
And that's all there is. You know, that's my main message. Whenever I'm talking about it, is that it should just be considered like you would consider anything else.
Correct.
Right. I'm not saying yes. I'm not saying no. But all of these hang-ups we have around, there was a time where there was a lot of hang-up around therapy. There was a time there was a lot of hang-up around 12 steps. Correct. Now there's a lot of hang-up around psychedelics. Like, let's get that out of the way, and then we have everything on the table, and we see what's best. It's not going to solve everything.
But it does. The key is afterwards is really the work afterwards.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
So that's what I want to clarify. It's not. This is just the opening. You get the preview of the movie, and then you got to make the movie.
Sometimes you get gifts. Sometimes it feels like you get gifts where something is resolved completely and that won't come back.
Right.
Or sometimes you see something and you can't unsee it. But 95% of the time, you get the opening and then you got to walk through the door.
You got to
do the work.
Door.
And I think that over time, you know, if you compare this use here, the way we use it, versus the way it's used, let's say in the Amazon or in other cultures, is there's a community around it. So one of the difficult, and I hear less people talking about it, one of the difficult aspects of psychedelics is that it introduces you to a reality that can often be very different than your own. So you start walking around and you don't feel like you're on solid ground. So one way to deal with that is to have a community of people who've experiencing some of these same things, especially if you have a very materialistic life and you start seeing some of these dimensions or realities. It throws everything. It could potentially throw everything into question and could be very destabilizing. And I've seen it many times. What I'm hopeful for is over time that communities are built around this. If you think about the 12 steps, for example, you have the AA, the big book, but there's only so far it's going to take you without a group of people who are reading this and applying it. So it's like, okay, you had this vision. How are you applying it? And that's where, I mean, you see certain people get lost, right? They want to live in Bali for the rest of their life. They want to disconnect from reality.
You have a broken vessel. You have to rebuild it with, but it has to be with a tzimtzum.
Correct.
With a constant contraction. Because if you any vessel that has too much light will eventually break again.
That's one good way of looking at it, is that some people are getting way too much light without the vessel.
Too much light, something.
And the vessel doesn't always have to be themselves. The vessel can be the people around them who are then able to help contain it.
That come back from Uman or they'll be connected with Rabbi Nachman, and there's many people that don't have vessels. They'll go there, they're dancing 24 hours a day, and then next thing you know, Rosh Hashanah comes, they're sleeping on the floor.
Right.
So there's that's one of the biggest messages Rabbi Nachman, Rabbi Nathan spoke about, is when you get the light, you have to make sure you contract the light. Because if the light is not contracted, number one, it cannot be sustained, and you'll just break the vessel and go backwards.
Right.
So any light that I get, I try to, I think big, but I plan small. Because if we're trying to get something before it's time, sometimes it won't be good for you.
Yeah, I think even about Torah, right? It says in the Gemara that it could be Samachaim or Samamaves.
100%.
Right. What are those aspects that get us to use it appropriately? And obviously the same is with less powerful tools like psychedelics.
Gabriel Matz's books, I've read. A lot of his stuff is really, really. His language is really amazing. But one of my favorite lines, which is so true, running away from pain is what's causing more pain.
Okay.
So I would figure out this is where Emunah comes in. Like ultimately, any attempt based on that line, any attempt to stop the growth process is what's causing the pain.
Right. Correct. You're either facing life or running away from life. Those are the only two choices.
Correct. So that's where I think we have Chassidus and we have Chachma Bin and Dat, the real CBD, to get us to the next level.
Right. I think
that's my opinion.
So I'll tell you where I think your opinion falls a little short is because your personal experiences are different than people who were introduced to it. So if I understand your story correctly, is the water wasn't tainted for you?
No, it was not.
So you can read a book of Reb Nachman, you can read a book of Chassidus, and not have your third grade teachers yelling at you.
Wow.
Right? That vision in your head, and that's what so many people are missing, and that's why.
So what do you do with this? What do you do if your vision? How do you start untainting? But just actually, it's very true, by the way, because I don't sometimes I don't understand. Okay, what do you mean? Because you're right, I didn't have those.
You didn't have the trauma.
I had none of it, which is better.
Listen, I've wondered for myself, like with my own kids, like what would be better? This idea of just. I've struggled with which school to put my kids into. Is a Jewish school better or not? Do I want to introduce and ruin it for them, or give them an opportunity to approach it themselves? I think that that sensitivity around it is like just introducing kids to Judaism, introducing kids to God is not by itself a good thing. It's good if done correctly. It's harmful if done incorrectly. Okay. And this happens. Every single person in recovery I know who grew up religious.
So you see that.
I've seen it with myself. I have to get over. When I came into recovery, and I said the door in recovery is like a dog door, right? You have to come in.
Their version of God. It's their version of God.
Of course. So I came in, personal experience, right? I came into meetings, and I was desperate. Why? So I couldn't stay faithful. I was in a relationship. I couldn't stay faithful. So I needed help. I was in therapy. I tried different things. Stuff that I used to get over sexual abuse, EMDR and other stuff, was not working for the addiction. The obsession was just way too strong. So I'm introduced to meetings. And I see the first step, admitted we're powerless over addiction, our lives have become unmanageable. Okay, no problem. But I saw on the wall the other steps. And I remember seeing step 3, the word God. And I had to fight everything just to sit in the chair and say, okay, I'm not up to step 3. I don't know what it says. I don't understand what it means. It's a word I heard before. I'm not going there. Right now, I'm up to step 1. Because what did I see? What I saw in the room was people were happy. I saw people, you go to meetings, they're often very funny meetings. I had to go to recovery meetings. People are saying jokes the whole time.
Right.
So I'm going to this place. It's a heavy conversation, but I see a lot of lightness. I see a lot of peace. I want what they have, but I was triggered by these words, God. And I remember when I got to step 2 or step 3 and I started, sharing about this, one of the things I said is that currently my feelings about God is that if he exists, I hate him. Now, how did I get that? How did I get to there? You can call him my fault, but I was introduced to God. Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere.
You still had
2, 3
anger,
years old.
right? You had anger,
tons of anger, and a lot of it was to God, and a lot of it was to religion. So I had to unlearn all of that in order to reapproach. So what you're talking about, Chachma bin Das, Chabad, Hispodus,
right. That's a whole different ballgame, right?
Your water wasn't tainted. You can approach it from your life, read a book, see the beauty in it, and everything's okay. You think Gabor Mate's son is reading his books with the same authenticity and sincerity that you and I are? He's reading, and it's bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. He doesn't practice this. He doesn't practice that. That's what it. Now it feels like I spoke to Daniel Mate, right? So saying that was experience. It's kind of the same.
That's exactly what our consciousness of God changed. One of the things that really helped me on a conscious level is David Hawkins' book "Let It Go," which is not a Jewish book, but it is that book. Somehow I have to try to make it take the Hasidus into it. Bring Hasidus into that book, which one of my goals. But the whole point is telling you your whole personality is based on whatever you hold on to. So if you're holding on to anger, you're going to view life as angry. You're going to view God as angry.
Yeah.
Until you let go of that, you'll never see basically your relationship with your Creator changes based on your relationship with your consciousness. You cannot a person who's full of love can never hate God, because he's just channeling God.
But before we access that, we have to heal all of our resentments and traumas. And there was a lot that I was able to do through 12 steps. There was a lot that I was able to do through recovery. And then I hit a wall. Because when you say it in God's name, it's a little bit tougher to overcome. You kind of need bigger tools to not
Did you ever understand the concept of that resistance is actually teaching us what we need to do?
I've heard that, but the relevance to this?
Basically, that could have been, like, for example, the prayer itself that you keep on mentioning, that I keep on hearing prayer, keep on hearing prayer. You heard it a bunch of times.
Yeah, recently.
So I'm saying this is like the call from heaven.
Yeah, and I can see that. Yeah. I can see that. I remember having a friend. He said, "I hate working, a certain kind of machines in the gym. Like I hate doing these
exactly
exercises."
Same concept.
Like
That's
what to do.
It's funny because my trainer will specifically, he'll completely change every single workout, because he says the minute you start getting comfortable in one position, you'll never come here where you're not going to lose your breath, and I'm going to make sure you do it. And he tells it to me specifically because he wants to shock the muscles all the time. It's not easy, because there's so much of a resistance, there's so much pain, Right.
But you finally get comfortable, and then it knocks
you out. The minute you thought, okay, I know what he's going to do now, he all of a sudden changes the game. But think about it. We love sports, right? We all watch sports. The whole thing is changing the game plan. Audibles. It's if you don't do that, then you're predictable and you lost.
Correct.
So it's like that's what Rav Nachman always says, we have to change our garments all the time, because the Yetzer Hara goes after you. He knows who you're going to be, but if you change your garments.
What does he mean by that?
Basically, when you recreate yourself. Chassidus gives us Rav Nachman says that a person always can say tomorrow. Let's say I decide to myself that there's a Gemara that says that if a person could be married on account that he's the tzaddik, that means the guy could be a completely rasha, low life, but he can get married because he says, I'm going to be a tzaddik, and the marriage is good. The fact that you can declare something and have intent and have desire, you can become a new person.
So
we can always recreate, continuously renewal. Exactly.
Right.
Like the Breslov drink, it's called 7-Up, because there's so much falling down spiritually. I feel great this morning. I feel like crap this afternoon.
I gotcha.
Reinvent yourself constantly.
Right.
And that's tremendously helped me.
Yeah, when people say I talk about healing or therapy or stuff like that, I don't feel like I'm talking about it. I feel like I'm talking about life.
Right. Exactly.
Correct.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't know how to separate the.
And also, you have to be aware. Also, the fact that you're a Taurus. You have to understand one of the things that Rav Kook speaks about all the time, that the highest level of spirituality is to understand oneself. Like when I understood myself and I worked on, oh my God, I have a lot of intense energy. I get very resentful quickly. I have a lot of anger. I worked on those issues individually, and then once you release that, the real you comes out.
Right, it makes room for a lot more.
For example, if if you tell yourself, I'm going to work on not being stubborn. I'm going to be open to suggestions, right? That opens up things. You understand? For example, you're familiar with people in the rooms. Every addict comes into a facility with tons and tons and tons of stuff they've been holding on for years.
100%.
We agree, right?
Yeah,
Nobody's coming in there.
They wouldn't be.
There's that, especially because they're bottling up. There's nobody that comes in the door that doesn't have like years and years of resentment, lack of forgiveness, and the whole point is getting them to let go one at a time.
Right.
So it's not like we have to do more. I think we have to let go more.
Right. There's a book on recovery, Drop the Rock. It should actually be called Drop the Rocks.
Correct.
So,
So what does your daily ritual look like nowadays? What do you do on good days? What do you do on rough days? How do you get yourself in a good state when you don't have the?
Well, first of all, I do use prayer.
Okay.
Right?
What does work for you? What does not work for you?
Everything is one mix. I run a business.
Okay.
Right, electronics distribution business. At the same point in time, I do a lot with the podcast, and as a result of that, a lot of people reach out.
Beautiful.
So I don't really make a distinction. If I'm at work, I have 2 days a month that I focus on the podcast. But in general, if I'm working,
right.
one email could be a person asking for help. The next one can be how to price a product, and the next one could be it's all one thing. It's all one thing. There's no distinctions.
You find like you since doing the podcast, you're getting a lot of reflected light.
The podcast itself, there's both. There's a lot of benefits to it, a lot of relationships, a lot of relationships that are developed. But there's also a responsibility that it comes with. I find that it definitely attracts. Like with everything, there's pros and cons, and I found that I need to be careful about ways it could be used or misused.
Right. Right.
Things that are said that can be misunderstood.
Right.
Etc.
I've had to. You'll get to. I've been doing this already 6-7 years. You'll see. And sometimes you're going to have to become yourself. There's many people that told me, oh, you can't talk about you pay me, you can tell me what to talk about.
Right.
You don't pay me, I'll talk about what exactly. So at the end of the day, you're going to get, if you're speaking the truth, you're going to get some negative feedback.
Right.
But again, this is an opinion. We're basing on, you like it, you don't like it, end of story.
Right. What I found is something important. I actually had a conversation with someone about it last week on my podcast is, let's say I'm not in a great place.
Okay.
And I have a conversation with someone. Okay, so I've affected one person with a little bit of my negativity that I'm vibrating that day. But if I do it on a podcast, like this lives forever. So I found the importance of continuously being at a much better place. Like how important that is in order to.
Yeah, but you also have to reckon. It's also good to show up on a day where this is,
as long as I'm willing to go there.
Correct.
If I'm speaking from that place, then it's no problem. But if I'm speaking from a place of
understood,
let me tell you what to do, even though I don't like to talk that
instructing
way.
people.
Right, exactly. And I'm not in a good place.
Right. Nachman would never instruct people what to do. He would just recommend people what to do.
Right.
Because people when they're, there's a story about the Turkey Prince. I don't know if you heard the story. There's basically a guy decides to be he was a prince and he started acting like a turkey. And little by little, he lost his self-esteem. Next thing you know, they called every doctor, every psychologist, and to the point where they brought a sage, and the sage got underneath the table and started taking off his clothes. And little by little, he helped him get off the table. The whole point is, people with low self-esteem, they don't want to be told what to do. So you pretty much have to give them examples. You have to give them stories. You have to give them... It's a whole science to it. Because when a person is a very, very low place... Just like, for example, imagine a guy sleeping for 3 hours and 3 days in a hotel room, and you open up the shades and say, "Wake up!" The light can actually blind them more. So you have to have a lot of patience, and really, really get them to make the decision, and just give them enough of a story to wake them up.
Right. It also has to come, what I find, especially with addiction. Sometimes we can look at someone and say, "Stop this behavior, stop that behavior," but we don't always know what it's protecting. We've all adopted these behaviors in order to avoid a worse reality.
Right.
I have a friend who's his parents reached out to me. He was addicted to weed. Like, he's got to stop smoking weed. He's got to stop smoking weed. But anytime I saw him stop smoking weed, he got so depressed to the point of suicidal. So the answer wasn't to keep smoking weed, of course not. The answer was to deal with
the anxiety, right?
What's underlying it? Why did he feel so meaning? Why did he feel so little meaning? Why did he feel so little purpose? And in his case, what I saw is that he felt forced to live a life that wasn't truly his. And as he developed the confidence,
right,
as he's developing the confidence now to live a life that feels more like him, the weed use has dropped by 90%. But just to tell someone, you stop smoking weed.
What is it doing for you?
Might have a guy jump off a building.
Right. Like, what is it doing
in his case, I think it was keeping him alive.
Right.
So, and I think in many cases, it's very easy to stand from here and tell someone else
but
what
everything
to do.
is rooted, I think everything is literally rooted in childhood behaviors. I mean, something that happened in childhood. For example, I grew up as my parents got divorced. So I came here at 8 years old with my single mother. Next thing you know, my mother didn't have any money. So I'm like, okay, who's going to pay my bills? I got to start working. Right. So I had a very, very aggressive, get rich or die trying attitude. And that led me to try to, I did parties, etc. It led me to gamble. And the reason why I was gambling is because I said net worth equals self-worth. So if I don't make money, I'm a nobody. And that got me to my gambling addiction. But if I understood myself, I would never have been there.
Right. So the work wasn't really to stop gambling as much as it was to
it taught me that.
Why
do I need to go prove to people that I had money or not? It was low self-worth.
And also you probably needed that lesson in that way.
No question about it.
Right. You need to lose a good amount of money gambling.
No question.
You weren't going to read it in a book.
Once a person gets connected to his higher power, to God, there's nothing more. There's no greater relationship than you can have. And I think with kids itself, the number one emphasis, and Reb Nachman said it, first be happy, then be religious. Because if you're trying to be happy, if you're trying to be religious without happiness, you're not going to get anybody. First be happy, then be religious. I think that's the key.
I think this is very important.
Anything with Judaism has to be associated to joy. If it's not associated to joy, then there's a problem.
That's what Reb Nachman says.
Reb Nachman says.
Yeah.
First be happy, then be religious.
It is a problem. Sometimes the seriousness and heaviness and intensity that is often accompanied with
if
religion.
That is not the main emphasis. Joy, then because joy is emunah. Joy is shechina. You don't have joy, then whatever you're doing, it's not really not real Judaism.
How do you understand?
It's religion. It's a fear. There's even Rav Kook. I don't know if you've read Rav Kook's books.
I haven't, no.
But if you read Rav Kook's books, it's exactly uprising. It's the Geber Mate on steroids in the religious way.
Oh, yeah.
But his way of thinking it's just another.
What language are they in?
Huh? English.
Oh,
he has English books. But Rav Kook's teachings, it's exactly the consciousness, and many people were against them. But if you read Rav Kook's books, you'll find exact similarities to what you like, the open-mindedness.
I guess it's a good thing to have people against you. Do you have people against you?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. But again, nothing. Right. I tell people very simple. I'm not here to entertain you. I'm here to educate you. If you want me to entertain you, we can have 20 girls here in the park. This is not entertainment. This is education. And I would want the same thing when I was here to tell me. I want to be educated. I don't want to be entertained right now in my life.
Right.
Bottom line, is it making me better or am I getting entertained out of it? So unless you're entertaining people all day long, you won't piss anybody off. But if you're educating people, you're going to piss people off.
Right. Obviously, you're saying something that they don't know. Otherwise, there would be no reason to say
or there will be a resistance that something bothers them. And if there's something bothering them, you should be... And I always tell people, I remember my LA class, guys, if you walk out of this class without a little nausea, that means I'm not doing a good job. I want you to be a little nauseous. I want you to be a little nauseous.
Like a purgative, right?
I want you to be a little nauseous because the little nauseous means, oh, I don't like that. It's bothering me. I need to
maybe
change
get someone to throw up during a class.
I need to change it.
Right.
If I'm too happy, that means I'm not touching any nerves. So the fact that you are bothered a little bit, it's actually I did my job. If I didn't do it, then I'm just entertaining you. You can have a moti here. You can have a comedian here.
I understood. How do you understand fear of punishment? The Rambam says that one of the principles of faith is the
Right.
belief that reward and punishment exists.
I'll tell you, this actually the real definition that I found the other day, which blew my mind. And I just read it maybe a couple months ago. God has two operating systems. God's ways is always to look at the good of a person and see everything he does is for the good. And he really, really looks away from things that you do bad. Now, let's say you don't want to do anything good. He doesn't punish you. What he does is he leaves you up to nature, which is actually kindness. Do you understand? If your son decides, God forbid, if your son decides to be in your house, he has to grow in your house, and he sees the love that you have for him. Obviously, you're not enabling him. But should he decide to leave, he's no longer under your jurisdiction. Now he's up to the
Natural
streets.
consequences.
He's
Yeah,
up
which
to
I often-
natural consequences. But it's
Right.
not. You're not punishing him. He's punishing himself by leaving. Now, if you want to go live a life of natural consequences, then that's up to you. That's up to you whether you decide that that's the right life for you.
So that's the way you see. Right. It's the absence of something. It's not
Correct.
punishment.
Correct. It's darkness is just an absence of light. So the fact that I have this, so punishment, for example, Rav Nachman will say, if a person trusts in God, he has divine supervision. If not, he has fallen fears. So the fallen fears is the paranoia of, oh my God, this is going to happen. That's enough of a punishment.
Right.
Because I don't have that divine supervision anymore.
It's often what we'll say with.
But it has nothing to do with God. It has
Right.
nothing to do with God. Do you understand? That I never understood the verse in the Torah that says, I, God, do not change. What do you mean God did not change? How could it not change? Yes, I'm there. I'm God. I'm Yud Kei Vav Kei. Now, if you decide to leave me, then you're into natural consequences. But natural consequences, nature is affecting you. It's not God. He leaves you to that nature.
And when someone is choosing a godly path, you're saying that then they're under the protection.
Then he has to assume that everything that's happening is for his benefit. It's either to make him grow, to cleanse. It's not punishment. We always say what God calls love, we call punishment. I could say my whole life that I have seen nothing but good things that came after anything that has gone for me. It's a cleansing. It's a, sometimes I remember losing $4 million when I was 24 years old, investing in people who I was an idiot. But that was love. Because after that, I never invested in another person again. So that's love. It's
And
not
instead
punishment.
you did what? Invest in yourself.
Invest in myself, period. Never again will I trust. You taught me one time, never again will I ever.
You won't invest in anyone.
I will not invest in anybody unless I know everything about it, because I that lesson stayed with me, and it took my kishkas out of me. It took not 24, I was 31, I think, at that time. And it taught me a lesson.
You're going to trust yourself.
No, I just don't. I don't
Right.
know the business. I don't know it. And if I don't need a
You'll
partner,
invest
if
in
God
stocks?
doesn't have a partner, I don't need a partner.
You'll invest in stocks?
In stocks, I'll invest.
Right.
Invest, also.
Okay.
But in individuals, business deals, unless I know everything about the business, everything I know about the business, I will not do it.
Right.
It's that lesson. taught me
So you got a $4 million education.
correct,
One of the best.
correct. So is that a punishment?
You should have a diploma on your wall. for it.
Correct. Is that a
Yeah.
punishment? No.
If you're sitting here okay now, then no. It's not.
Correct. It's not a
Right.
punishment, and many things in my life. So that's where I look at it. That's what I'm trying to explain to you. Very important that if we have a very dysfunctional relationship with our Creator, that could screw up everything. We need to look at our Creator as Ein Sof, unlimited love. Anything besides that is just our perspective of it. The Zohar says this: that God is there according to your gates.
Meaning?
Your gates are perspective.
Understood.
Your relationship with God is based on your sharim, your gates. Your gates are perspective.
Right. Baal Shem Tov says something like that. He says that on the pasuk, like Chesed Hashem Yisei B'Venu.
Correct.
He explains that if we believe that God is Chesed, then we're surrounded by Chesed.
Correct.
But if we believe He's Din, then
Correct.
we'll be surrounded by that aspect of.
But with kids, I would definitely. I don't think secular schools is the answer either. I mean, I don't. Who knows what they're teaching people?
100%.
Yeah, I don't think that's.
No,
the
it's
answer
not.
either.
I'm not comfortable with
Yeah.
it. I'm not comfortable with it. I'm just, if we're crossing a street,
Right.
right?
But I hear what you're saying.
I'm not saying what the decision is.
No
I'm
question.
offering something else. If we're crossing a street, we should be conscious of the fact that there are cars that are driving fast that could hit us. Doesn't mean to cross or not to
Absolutely.
cross.
Absolutely.
It's just we should understand the risks we are taking. When we are introducing God to children, a lot of good can happen there and a lot of bad can happen there. It's not a riskless
question.
scenario just because you think a rabbi told you it's the right thing to do.
If it's the bad experience in the bad, I have family members that have had that they can't that married out of religion because they were so nauseous of the experience that they had as Judaism that they married out. They want nothing to do with it. And I'm like, listen, let me help. But they're just shut. They don't have anything to do with it.
When they say Kiddush Hashem or Chil Hashem,
Correct,
and it's not.
Correct. It's a real thing.
Yeah, it's a huge thing.
Real thing. It's a very scary. By the way, it's very scary. It's very scary because you cannot be a good educator if you're not a happy person. You cannot. It's very scary because people's moods and their view of their religion and it's a very scary. And I see this because I'm like, when I go into Uman, I see all these ex-Hasidic guys coming to. I said, I got you guys back. Yeah, we had a very dysfunctional relationship with our Creator. You helped us bring us back.
Tons and tons. The amount of times I've seen it in 12 steps where people who left yeshiva and they were viewed as, oh, these guys don't care, they're lazy, they're disinterested. And suddenly they find a godliness in recovery and they're the most passionate, the most sincere, the most,
no question.
I
think Shay's Top talks a lot about that. He's really gotten to where he saw that how many people have in 12-step meetings have had more spirituality than synagogues.
I remember a talk where he said, if I hear one more story from a kid who found a God in a church basement when they sat in yeshiva for 20 years.
It's pretty scary.
It's awful.
Especially when you're laying out
and the work is to unlearn
$40,000 of money in these tuitions and you're getting these kind of experience.
The work and the work often is to unlearn. It said if not for the Torah, we would learn about God from nature, we'd learn about God from animals. We don't need much to teach about God, right? Correct. You just stand there looking at an ocean, you're going to believe that God exists. But if you were told about God from when you were 1, 2, 3 years old and you had negative experiences.
Or having religion without spirituality.
Huge problem.
I mean, you see the shidduch market, you see the, people walking around like zombies. Without spirituality, there's no life. So religion, resumes, I mean,
right.
You need a lot more than religion in a relationship. You need spirituality. You need compassion. You need to see the good people, the good in them.
You mentioned that I counsel people often who are looking to get over porn addiction.
Sure, tell me about that.
So let's say many of them are not even dealing with a porn addiction. They watch porn once in a while and they have a lot of guilt and shame and everything else. So to them I say it's normal. If you're slipping once in a while in today's day and age, pick yourself up, move forward.
Correct.
You don't
pick yourself up is the key.
Yeah, this is not an addiction.
Correct.
Addictions are progressive. You need it more and more in frequency and intensity and variety. If it's that kind of thing, which probably 5 to 10% of the people who reach out to me, I might even recommend using the word addiction. For most people, saying if you remove the shame from the equation, you'd be perfectly fine. Like you're living in a world that's a hypersexualized world, hypersexualized. If every couple of months you're slipping on pornography, you don't have to make yourself crazy with this. Don't sit there and seek out meetings. You'll get way more ideas about what to do than anything else. Don't go there. If you're actually struggling and it's increasing in intensity, so then a real program is needed. We have to get to the root. What's sitting in there? So without going into everything, I'm often recommending to people 2 different things to do. Mm-hmm. One is a thank you / goodbye letter to their addiction. Thank you for helping me, for saving me,
I love that.
Yeah, there were many things that
what did you teach? What did it taught me? Right.
It did something. I got into pornography as a teenager. I was struggling. I was lonely. I was isolated. I needed something.
Right.
I didn't feel safe. I had tons of terror, absolute terror. The one person I tried to get close with sexually abused me. Okay, so now I had a thing to fill that gap. As an adult, I didn't need it anymore. I had emotional resources. I had physical resources. I had autonomy. I was able to heal in a different way. But pornography did nothing for me. The problem is that a lot of people just hear the word sin and they think it's terrible. So I can never say that I got anything good. If you're starving and you eat a cheeseburger, it's going to fill you up.
It fills
Let's
you
not
up,
pretend it doesn't. There may be a problem there that you have to tone for, but it actually does something. These things, it gave me a momentary good feeling for many, many years. Today, I don't need it. Today, it's turning on me and eating me. Thank you. Goodbye. Your friend is always said is welcome. But the second one is often more important. I'll say, write a letter, address it to God, and express your anger. And if it has to start with the words F you, start there. How can you talk to God? I said, how can you not? If you feel that way, how can you have an opinion of God that he cannot handle your emotions? Doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense.
As a parent, one of the first things they teach, right, and a lot of parenting
express
courses,
it, right?
If your child is angry, that's a good thing if they can express their anger at you. So do you know who I am? No, they don't even know who you are. They can see you're 4 feet taller than them. Thank you. They know you can hit them across the room.
Right.
One thing. You don't need to prove it. The fact that they could express it and they feel safe expressing it, that's evidence of a relationship. And then you have something to build off of. So if that's what someone is truly feeling, which that's where I was, Hashem, God, a higher power, I don't know if you exist. If you do, I'm so mad at you. If I can see you, I'd hit you. Good, start there. A real relationship.
Get the ball rolling.
Yeah. And
isn't that what Bill W. did?
How? Go ahead.
He gave that. He basically said in a detox, he says, if you're there, then help me. And he got this light, and he got up to like the mountain that's in 12 steps.
So I think it was Bill W. or someone else, was actually a psychedelic treatment, a belladonna treatment.
Right.
That
really wow.
Yeah. So the connection between psychedelics and 12 steps is not said enough. Not said enough. One of the first members, I think it was Bill W., did a treatment called the belladonna treatment for their addiction, and after that they had some sort of revelation, or during that they had a revelation that eventually led to the 12 steps. And then Bill W. later in life thought that after someone does the 12 steps and cleans out a lot of the things, is then to use LSD. He wanted to bring it as the 13th step. I think Bill W. today, if he understood all the other tools available, he probably wouldn't choose LSD because it has some dangers that others don't. But the concept, I don't think he was completely.
Are you doing any breath work on a daily basis?
Very interesting you mentioned breath work. So I've used breath work for years. As a matter of fact, I had a coach who I worked with. We'd meet twice a week.
Yeah.
And that's what he did, was breath work with me. And he taught me breath work to do constantly. So breath work has been a part of my life for years. The states I've been able to access on breath work post-psychedelics are incomparable, because it opens something that now I know it exists. Previously, as I was getting to those states, I thought I'm losing my mind. Now that I've seen it on psychedelics, it's accessible to me in breath work. I don't think that's going to be true for everyone. I'm sure I had certain walls and protections that I needed a bigger tool to break down. But yeah, breath work is a huge part of my life. If I'm struggling now, if I need a recenter, it's usually music and breath work.
It's funny. Music kills the ego. I mean, these are all things. Music, they say music kills the ego. If you listen to the good music, it kills the ego. You're loose. Think about it. Let's put music on. Next thing you know, you're yourself. Music kills the ego. That's why. And also breath work. It calms down the heart.
Right.
It gives you oxygen. It gives you, Ramnachman calls it, it gives you mochem gadlut. It gets you into higher states of consciousness.
Yeah, physically it's impossible to be angry and breathing deeply at the same time.
And be present if you're taking one breath at a time.
Right. I saw somewhere, I don't know where I saw this, that a lot of people think smoking relaxes them, but it's not the nicotine, it's the deep breathing that they're doing when they're smoking. Wow. It's like, oh wow, it's so relaxing. Of course, do the same exact thing with an unlit cigarette or no cigarette, and tell me how you feel.
It's funny how we're just Shavuot is tonight, and Reb Nachman says that Shavuot is the cure for the lungs.
Is that right?
Yeah. Why specifically the lungs? It's because there's 5 lobes of the lungs, and five books of the Torah. So what he's saying is also when you're learning and breathing, you're also breathing. When I'm learning Torah, I'm breathing.
Right.
It's not just the physical breathing; it's the physical learning it. That means when you learn these teachings and if you're really into it, you're a different person.
It changes something in you.
Right. It gives you that. It gives you. It gives you that boost of energy. Of that. So I think we have, again, we're supposed to be spiritual beings. Breath work. I mean, this is part of our lives.
Yeah, it's beautiful to see that these things are actually coming into.
It's coming into now. Yeah.
Yeah, coming into these.
I mean, there's a big move right now for self-improvement. I think people want a better life. I think people are trying to get more educated and less entertained right now.
Yeah, it's
that, Andrew Huberman's done a tremendous job on educating people.
Yeah, he actually released a podcast last week on psilocybin.
I want to hear
which I listened to, but it's fascinating. It's the research and studies. I interviewed someone last week on my podcast. We'll put it out in the next little while. Matthew Johnson from Johns Hopkins University.
Really?
20 years researching psychedelics. And many of the studies they did, people end of life, knowing they're dying of cancer in a couple of years, giving them psilocybin and changing the whole perspective and outlook on.
It's changing perspective.
100%.
Is really the key.
And I think one of the things it does, just understanding, I didn't read the study, but understanding the way psilocybin works and the imagination, what I imagine the struggle would be over someone dying and the fear of dying,
Wow.
is that it connects you with your spirituality so powerfully. It's an undeniable truth.
But
experience.
you're ultimately, in all these experiences, you're ultimately doing one thing, is you're letting go.
You need to let go. Yeah,
I mean that's the goal here, no? I mean, what are we?
in a nutshell, that's all it is.
It's all letting go. That's why I recommended the book "Letting Go" by David Hawkins. It's just you just have to let go as much as you can.
Right. And it was
just mental.
there were a couple ceremonies that I had where I was like begging for it to end, and the realization came is that it doesn't end. It doesn't end when it ends.
Wow.
All it does is make
a
you more
constant
aware of the ceremony that's going on. So I'll give you an example. You mentioned David.
You were begging for the ceremony time.
Yeah, I needed to stand. Too intense, too tough. I'm like, I can't wait for it to end. I can't wait for it to end.
Wow.
Sometimes it's so.
Right.
If people think this is a bypass or this is a certainly not ayahuasca. If people think this is the avoidance of work, no, it's a lot of work concentrated into a short amount of time. This is pure intensity. In many cases, it can also be blissful and peaceful and nice and wonderful if that's what someone needs. But I know someone who's done ayahuasca over 2,000 times.
2,000 times?
Over 2,000, but he serves.
Got it.
Serving ayahuasca. So every
Oh,
time
he's
they
serving.
serve.
Got it.
So he's drinking, and every single time he drinks for himself, he's nervous. How many things can you imagine? A guy skydiving 2,000-3,000 times and being nervous? Never.
That's crazy.
Every single time he's nervous, there's a reverence, there's a sacredness. He says even more so. He said as he continues, it becomes even more and more of that.
Oh, but he has a responsibility also.
But even for himself, if he's saying,
Wow.
I need for myself, recently he needed to heal something physically, so he was working with it. He said he was incredibly nervous. It took him like 45 minutes or an hour just to prepare himself to take the drink that he prepared for himself. And one of the lessons were that the ceremony doesn't end. We're in ceremony now, like
It'll never end.
it
Right?
never ends. Like
Right.
letting go happens now. I'll give you an example. It's smaller, but you mentioned David Hawkins twice.
Yes.
Okay, so it's a David Hawkins book that's been popping up in my head. I don't know him. I didn't read it.
Yeah.
I didn't read his work, but someone gifted me a few of his books a few years ago, and this concept of power versus force.
It's
One of his books.
incredible.
And I was looking for it this morning. I was looking for it in my house because I wanted to bring it with me. We're going somewhere for Shavuos. I wanted to bring it with me, and I couldn't find it. I'm like, should I read it? Should I buy it? And then you mentioned David Hawkins twice in this
That's
conversation,
incredible.
right? So I'm like, okay, I got to read this.
Because
I gotta read this book.
you'll understand it. You'll understand it.
My point is that the connections are always happening. They're
Right.
there in front of you. Very often when
So what's that called? Mindfulness.
yeah, it's just being
Right, it's
present.
just
It's
being
present to
mindfulness.
what's there. It's 100% being
Correct.
present to what's there.
Being in a good state and receiving we can only
Seeing
only-
everything, not
only when you're in a
resisting
good
anything.
state.
Exactly. Being completely
So
open.
this is why it's funny how our sages tell us that the Rav Nachman has a very famous Torah, lesson 106, and he says whatever wisdom you have, you should always depart it to people. Because what's going to happen on the day of evil, when the day you're stressed, you're going to need the help.
Right.
So what happens is because when you're in a good state, keep on giving help people because you're going to need it one day. Like the problem you're going to go through because you help somebody else, God's going to open up your mind.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Rav Nachman was maybe, prophesizing a day like today where a lot of these conversations are recorded and we have the opportunity to.
Right.
On the way here, I was actually listening to my own podcast because I was getting a lot of feedback. I did one with a guy, Remy Garari, a Chabad guy who lost his daughter to suicide.
Oh yeah.
And he's open about it and talks about it. And we had a beautiful conversation. But I don't remember the conversation. It happened 6 weeks ago. I've had so many podcasts since then. How am I supposed to remember this conversation?
Right.
So on the way here, I was listening to it. And then some of the things that I was saying on it, I'm like, well, I need to hear that today.
Right.
So
Wow.
now, like Rav Nachman is saying, is now even more true in
Wow. Amazing.
in an age of...
Amazing.
I had a guy I interviewed once, and he was in a really good space when I interviewed him, really good space. And then some things happened, business, personal life, relationship, like everything, the world was collapsing around the same time. And we were talking, this is about a month or 6 weeks after the podcast conversation, and I said, I know just the thing for you. So I said, we're releasing your podcast in 2 days.
Wow.
All your answers are in there. Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
when you're in a good state, God sends you that.
You put it out there and you get it.
You put it out there.
Get it back.
I've seen that. I've seen, and anytime also when you're helping the public, sometimes you're saying to yourself, how am I gonna have time to help all these people? How am I gonna have time? God gives you extra strength to do it. He'll give you extra strength. So sometimes you have to also, what am I going to talk about today? You know, this is after 1,500 podcasts I have.
Right.
He
That's
gives
rough.
he opens, it's all about opening up the mind. He just opens up your mind as long as you surrender to that concept.
Fascinating. Did we cover everything you wanted to on this?
I think we cover everything. Eli, it was such a pleasure.
Thank you so
Really,
much.
I hope everybody is going to get a lot of chizuk. How do people reach your podcast?
In Search of More. We're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts.
Amazing. It's good. It's always good to have a different perspective on things. And I think we're on very similar journeys. I think you'll end up in his bodhidut one day. I have a feeling that you're going to be talking in the fields. I just have a feeling.
All right, maybe one day we'll do an ayahuasca ceremony together.
Listen, if you get my wife to approve it.
If she needs to approve it, that's the first thing we'll sort out in ceremony.
Exactly.
That she doesn't need to approve your decisions.
Thank you again, Ali. Thank you.
All right.
Perfect. Okay.